Hello. I am the Linux Mitch. A week ago, I did a video on how to install Arch Linux in your Windows 10 system and have it as a dual boot. And then afterwards, I showed how to delete your Arch Linux install and put your Windows 10 back to normal. Now, when I did that installation, I used the automated Arch installer, but before I logged into the automated Arch installer, I had to do some prep work in the terminal. And then when the installation was finished, before I rebooted into my Arch install, again I had to do some prep work in the terminal. Now today I'm going to do a dual boot with Debian and Windows 10, and you don't have to do any prep work. And you don't have to do anything in the terminal. It's going to be easy peasy. Debian is going to do everything for you. Now, the one thing is to beware is that when you're shrinking your Windows partition, there's always the possibility that you could lose data. So you should always make sure you have your personal data and anything that you need backed up on a separate drive somewhere. Now, I've done this several times already. I've done it in virtual machine, and I also did it in a real bare metal computer. In a real bare metal computer, I installed Debian alongside Windows 10, and it's working fine, and I had no problem. So, and I've also done it several times in a virtual machine. So, I think it's going to be okay, but there's always a possibility that you could lose data, and you should have everything backed up, and buyer beware. So, let's get to it. So I'm in a virtual machine of Windows 10, and the only thing I did to it was I installed Firefox and I installed iTunes. So now I'm going to open up the file manager. And this part is going to be the same as what I did with my Arch Linux. I'm going to click on C. I'm going to open up properties. We can see here, this virtual machine has a 127 gigabyte hard drive. I'm using 24.5 gigabytes for my install, my Windows install that is, and I have 102 gigabytes of free space. So I'm going to close my file manager. I'm going to right click on Start menu. I'm going to go to Disk Management. And I'm going to make this full screen. And you can see there's 3 partitions here. There's a 100 megabyte EFI system, 127 gigabytes for my Windows installation, and a 500 megabyte recovery partition. Now, I didn't make these partitions. The Windows installer made these partitions for me when I installed Windows. So now I'm going to click on this partition. I'm going to right click it. I'm going to shrink the volume. So I'm going to shrink my partition, my Windows partition, and I'm going to make my Debian partition 22 gigabytes. So I'm going to type in 22,000 and I'm going to shrink. And it's shrinking the partition. And there it is. So now we have this free partition where we're going to put the Debian. Well, the Debian installer is going to do it for us. We're going to install Debian on this partition. So I'm going to close this and we're going to power down. Let's shut down. And what I'm doing is I'm going to shut down Windows. Now this is a virtual machine, so I'm going to attach my Debian ISO and log into the Debian installer and do an install. Now, if this was a bare metal machine, I would shut down the machine and I would plug in my thumb drive with my Debian ISO on it. So what I'm going to do is attach my ISO. Here we have Debian 12.4 ISO, and of course, if it was a bare metal computer, you turn the computer off and plug in your thumb drive and get into your boot manager and boot onto the ISO. But this is a virtual machine. I'm going to apply the changes. Then I'm going to go into my boot options. I'm going to click on CD-ROM and move that to the top and apply it. Now I'm going to open it. I'm going to go here, and now we're going to boot into our Debian ISO. And this Debian install is a net install, so it's going to take a while, so I'll be pausing the video. And here we are. And let's just make the screen large. And we have options here. You can use your arrows to go up and down. I'm just going to do a graphical install. I'm going to hit enter, and it's booting onto the Debian installer. And it came on to English, so I'm going to hit continue. Now it came on to the United States. You can use your mouse too, eh? I'm just going to use my arrow keys and go up to Canada, and I'm going to click on continue. American English, that's good enough for me. I'm going to continue. And now it's going through the install. Now this install is going to take about 40 minutes, but I'll be pausing the video. And if you're doing a net install of Debian, you don't have to sit at the computer for the whole time, but you should stay home. Don't go out for dinner, because there are going to be several times during the installation where the installation stops, it pauses, and you have to answer questions and click on some things. So if you go out for dinner for 2 hours and come back, your installation won't be finished, so you should stick around. You just don't have to sit in front of the computer the whole time. So it's asking me for a host name, so I'm going to call this Debian Dual, and I'm going to continue. And I'm going to skip domain name. Now it's asking me for a root password, so I'm going to put my root password in. I'm going to repeat it and continue. Now it's asking for the full name of the user. I'm just going to type in Mitch. Let's continue. And it's asking me for a username account. I'm just going to type in Mitch. Actually, it was there. I didn't have to retype it, eh? Now it's asking for a password for Mitch. So I'm going to put a password in for Mitch. And I'm going to put another password in for Mitch. And I'm going to continue. And it's showing that I'm in Eastern time zone. That's correct. So I'm going to continue. And now it's detecting my disks. So it's going to go to a spot where we can partition the disks. So now it's giving you options. And it's saying, guided, use the largest continuous free space. And you can use your arrows to go up and down. Use the entire disk. Now, if we use the entire disk, it's going to blow away my Windows installation. And we don't want to do that. And you can use these two. And of course, you can use manual. So I'm going to use the guided, use the largest continuous free space. So it's going to use that free space that we made, and it won't blow away my Windows install. Okay, so let's continue. So now it's saying, do you want a separate home partition or a separate of these other partitions? But recommended for new users, and I'm going to go with the easy one, all files in one partition. Now at the top here, it's telling me, it's showing that I have a 137.5 gigabyte hard drive, but it's only going to use 23 gigabytes. Remember the partition we made? So I can see it's only going to use that partition. So everything looks good. So I'm going to hit continue, and it's giving you a layout of the land here. And we can see we have our EFI partition, Microsoft recovery space, basic data is 113.7 gigabytes. And you can see here, 22 gigabytes for my ext4. That's going to be number 5. That's going to be where my Linux install is going to go. And number 6 is going to be a 1 gigabyte swap partition for my Debian install. And everything looks good. So I'm going to continue. Now, default is no. Do you want to write changes to the disk? The default is no, and that's because they're trying to protect you to make sure you don't accidentally blow away a partition or a drive or a disk that you want to keep. So I know that everything is good. Partition 5 is going to be my ext4 where my Linux install is going. And partition 6 is going to be my swap partition. Now, normally when I'm doing my Arch installs, I don't use a swap partition, but the Debian automatically puts a swap partition in, and it's only going to make a 1 gigabyte swap partition, so I don't mind. 1 gigabyte is not bad. So I'm going to leave it there, and I'm going to click on yes, because the default is no. So I'm going to click on yes, and I'm going to continue. So now it's partitioning the disks. And I'm going to pause it until we get to the next spot. So don't go away. Okay, so it paused. And it's asking us if we want to scan extra installation media. And the default is no. And I'm going to stick with the default. I'm going to hit continue. And now it's asking me to choose a mirror. Well, by default, it went to Canada, and that's where I'm in. I'm in Canada. So I'm going to click continue. Now it's giving me a choice of mirrors. So I'm going to click on this mirror from the University of Waterloo, which is not too far from where I live. I'm going to click it on and then hit continue. And I'm going to skip this part. Continue. And now it's scanning the mirrors and configuring app. And I'm going to come back. I'm going to pause it and come back when we get to the next step. Okay, so don't go away. Now it's asking me if I want to participate in a package usage survey. The default is no, and I'm going to stay with the default. Hit continue. Now it's asking me what desktop I want to install, and it gives me a choice of, quite a few of them. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this Debian one. I'm going to get rid of the GNOME one. I'm going to leave standard system utilities on, and I'm going to click on the Cinnamon. Now it doesn't give you a choice of window managers, but I can install Awesome Window Manager after the fact. And I'm going to click on Cinnamon because I'm most familiar with Cinnamon. And I'm going to continue. Now this part's going to take a while, and like I said, this is a net install. So when we're finished installing the system, I won't have to go into the terminal and do anything. When the installation is finished, I'll be able to reboot, and a menu will come up, and I'll be able to reboot into my Debian or into Windows 10. Like I said, and because it's a net install, I won't have to update Debian. When I'm finished installing it, Debian will be totally up to date. Anyways, this part takes quite a while, so I'm going to pause the video and come back. So don't go away. So we're just going through the install. Like I said, it's going to take a while. And I think my face looks better like that, eh? I made it a little larger, but I centered it. Better than being it off to the side. Anyways, don't go away. I'll be back. It's going to pause several more times, and we're going to have to answer some more questions. Okay? So if you're doing this, don't go out for dinner. So the installation is complete. It took about a good 40 minutes. Anyways, what I'm going to do is power down my virtual machine, take the ISO off, and I'm going to log into Debian. Then I'm going to log into Windows. Then I'm going to show you how to delete my Debian and put my Windows back to normal. And I'm going to log back into Windows to show you that it's working. So I'm going to power down. Now I'm going to pause the video and power down now. So don't go away. I'll be back. So I'm going to hit continue. And it's finishing installation. And I'll be back. So I've disconnected my ISO. And I'm going to reboot into my brand new Debian system that's a dual boot with Windows 10. And of course, if this was a bare metal computer, you would shut down and pull out the thumb drive. So let's open it up. Let's make it full screen. Let's play it. Now, the thing is, we're going to come to a menu, and you got to hit your arrow keys. Now, the reason why I say that is this menu is automatically set up to go directly into Debian. And you have like actually, by the time it comes up, you have 3 seconds. If you want to pause it, you have 3 seconds. And if you hit your arrow keys, it pauses. And then you can go down into, you can log into Windows. But like I said, it automatically is going to go into Debian. So let's just go into Debian. Now, this Debian, I haven't done anything to it. I haven't configured it. I didn't make any changes to it or anything like that, and I'm not going to because I've done that in previous videos. And I installed the Cinnamon desktop. So let's put my username in, my password. So like I said, I installed the Cinnamon desktop, and I've done many videos about installing the Cinnamon desktop. And let's just change the display. That's the only thing I'm really going to do. Let's just change this to the way I always change it in my virtual machines. 1360 by 768. This is just for the virtual machine. So like I said, I've done many videos about how I like to install, change, and configure the Cinnamon desktop. And the thing is, when you install the Cinnamon desktop in pure Debian or pure Arch, it's really ugly. And if you want it to look nice, you have to configure it and change it. And of course, you don't have to go into a configuration file. It's really easy to change. Everything is in the GUI. It's user-friendly. And I've done tons of videos on how I like to make my Cinnamon desktop look like. So I'm not going to do that today. Now I'm just going to do one thing, and that's this. I'm going to open up a terminal, and my user doesn't have password yet. Sorry, my user doesn't have sudo. So I'm going to change into root. I'm going to put my password in. I'm going to do sudo. Oh, sorry. I'm going to do vi, and I don't have vim installed yet either. Etsy sudoers. And I'm just going to go down and give mensch sudo privileges. And I'm going to save the file. And I'm going to exit out of there. I'm going to clear the screen. I'm going to do sudo apt. Well, let's see if htop is installed. That's not it. Sudo apt install htop. Put mensch's password in. And like I said, because this was a net install, we don't have to update the system. And that's it. Let's clear the screen. Let's do an htop. So we're running kind of high, but it is the Cinnamon desktop. So Debian runs a little bit higher than Arch Linux. And of course, the Cinnamon desktop runs higher than a window manager. And you know what? Just for the heck of it, let's do sudo apt install. Awesome. I wasn't going to do this because this is more of a video about how to do a dual boot. But hey, now I'm not going to configure Awesome. I'm not going to download my configuration files or anything like that. But the Awesome wasn't available in the installer. It gave you the option of installing several different types of desktop environments, but it didn't give you the option of installing a window manager. And I wasn't going to do that for this video, but hey, what the hey. Okay, so let's close this. Let's log out. And of course, you can make Cinnamon look a lot nicer than this. Really easy too, but I don't want this to be a long video. And we're going to click on this. Let's go into Awesome. Password in. Let's open up a menu. Let's do xrandr s 1360 by 768. That's better. Let's make it full screen. Let's do an htop now. So now we're running at 400. So like I said, Debian runs higher than Arch Linux. Not a heck of a lot higher, but it does run higher than Arch Linux, but still a lot less than Windows. So now we're running at 430 megabytes of RAM. Not bad. So let's get out of here. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to reboot. Now, in Debian, when you do a reboot, you have to do sudo. You don't in Arch, but in Debian you do. So sudo reboot. Put my password in, and it's rebooting. Now I got to be careful because it's going to automatically go back into Debian. So I got to hit the arrow keys to get into Windows. Okay, because you only have like 3 seconds or so. Let's go into Windows. Make sure my Windows is working. And if it takes a long time to boot into Windows, I'm going to pause the video. Windows is funny. Sometimes it takes a long time to boot in. Sometimes it boots in quickly. And the same thing with shutting down Windows. Sometimes it shuts down quickly, and sometimes it takes a long time to shut down, and the thing is spinning and spinning and spinning. So I'm just going to pause the video. And here we are. We've landed on the login screen. Nice picture, eh? So let's do my password. And there we are. We've logged into Windows. Our Windows system is still intact. So now, let's say, like I said, when you're booting into the system, you have 5 to 3 seconds and it's automatically going to go into Debian. Because Debian is set as the default login. So let's say you want Windows to be the default login. The first one to log into, so that if you don't touch your keyboard, it automatically goes into Windows. And then if you want it to go into Debian, you have to pause it. So I'm going to show you how to do that. And then let's say you think, I don't like this dual booting. I want to delete Debian and I want to put my Windows back to normal. I'm going to show you that as well. Okay. So we're going to restart. Go here. Let's just restart it. And if this takes a long time to restart, I might have to pause the video. Look at this thing. Linux doesn't do this. Linux just powers down or reboots. One thing I can't stand about Windows. Look at this. Anyways, I'm going to pause the video. So here we go. Now you got to get ready to hit your keys. Okay. Okay, so we hit our keyboard and we paused it. So now we're going to go into the UEFI firmware settings. Now, one thing I want to say is that, and I think I already mentioned it, but this boot menu, I didn't put it in there and I didn't do anything to configure it or change it. This boot menu was installed by the Debian installer. Okay? And regardless of whether you're just doing this dual booting in a virtual machine or you're doing it in a bare metal computer, you're going to have the same menu. And I know this for a fact because I dual booted, and I think I already mentioned this earlier in the video, but I did a dual boot with Windows 10 and Debian in the virtual machine and in a bare metal computer. And even though this is a virtual machine, I tested this out in a bare metal computer. I have a bare metal computer, but I can't record from it. But I have a bare metal computer that's a dual boot with Debian and Windows. And I got the same menu. Anyways, so I paused it. So you're going to boot into it and you're going to hit your arrow keys to pause it. And after it's paused, you're going to go into UEFI firmware settings. So you're going to highlight it and hit enter. Okay, and it's just going to take a moment to go into there. And there we are. Now, when you're in this menu, you're going to use your arrow keys to maneuver around. Okay, your up and down arrow keys. So I'm going to highlight Boot Maintenance Manager, and I'm going to hit enter. Then I'm going to hit Boot Options. So then you can go up and down again, but I'm going to stay with Boot Options. Then I'm going to use my arrows to go down to Change Boot Order. Okay, so you see this list up here, and you see Debian is number 1 at the top, and the next one is Windows Boot Manager. So all I want to do is move the Debian to be below the Windows Boot Manager. I have to hit enter again. So I'm going to hit enter again. Now it brings up the list. So it brings up the second list. And you can see Debian is number 1. So I'm going to hit my minus key once. Now Windows Boot Manager is number 1. Okay. So now I'm going to hit enter to complete it. And it says right here, enter complete entry. So I'm going to hit enter. And now it says here, F10 to save. So I'm going to hit my F10. And now it's saying, press Y to confirm. So I'm going to press a Y. And now it says escape is to exit. So I'm going to exit. Now I want to go back in there and see if it saved it properly. So I'm going to go back into change boot order. And now you can see Windows is the number 1 boot manager. Now there's 2 reasons why you would want to do this. So the number one reason why you'd want to do this, or the first reason why you would want to do this, is let's say you're going to keep your dual boot system, but you want it to automatically boot into Windows first, and you want to pause it. If you want to go into Debian, you'd rather pause it and then choose Debian. But if you don't pause it, you want it to go straight into Windows. That's one reason why you would do this. And there's another reason why you'd want to do this. If you decide you don't want to keep your system, you want to delete the Debian partition, and you want to put your Windows system back to normal, to the way it was. This is another reason why you would do this. Because if you leave Debian as the number one boot option, and then you delete your Debian partition, you won't be able to get into your system. You go to reboot, and it's going to be all messed up. And it can be fixed, but it's going to be harder to fix. So if you're going to delete your Debian partition, you have to go and do this first. If you do this first, then you can delete your Debian partition and you'll be able to log into Windows like normal. Okay? So those are the two reasons why you would want to do this. So we can see it saved the Windows boot menu to be number one choice by default. So now we're going to commit changes and exit. Okay, we could discard changes, but we're going to commit the changes and exit. Okay, now we are going to escape, and let's just go back and make sure it's there. We got boot options, change boot order, and Windows is at top. Now we are going to keep pressing this, and we're going to go down to continue. We're going to continue, and we should be booting into Windows now. Put my password in. Okay, so here we are. Let's click on. So let's click on the C drive. Let's right click it. Let's click on properties. And my assistant is here. So we can see I have a 105 gig hard drive. I'm using 24 from my Windows install, and I have 81 free. Let's cancel that. Let's close that. Let's right click on the start menu. Let's go into disk management. Let's make it full screen. We're going to delete my Debian partition. Delete volume. So yes, I'm going to delete the partition. And it's deleting it. Okay, so it deleted the partition. Now I'm going to delete the swap file. This is the Debian swap file. So the Debian installer made a 1 gig swap file. So I'm going to delete that. So we're going to say yes, we're going to delete the partition. So now what we're going to do is we're going to extend our Windows partition back to the way it used to be. I'm going to click it on. I'm going to right click it. I'm going to extend volume. I'm going to hit next. I'm going to hit next. I'm going to finish it. There we go. I'm going to close this and I'm going to reboot and make sure everything's okay. So we're going to restart. Now, the thing is that now that we've deleted everything, when we boot into our system, that Debian menu is no longer going to come up. That whole menu, that whole boot menu that Debian installed will no longer come up. Okay? And hopefully it doesn't take too long to boot into Windows. There's one thing I can't stand about Windows is that sometimes it takes too long to boot up into it. Sometimes it takes too long to shut down. And for sure, it takes too long to do the updates. It's real painful. So it's booting up. And as you can see, that boot menu that was coming up that gave you the option of booting into Debian, Windows, or the EFI menu is no longer coming up. It's just booting straight into Windows. Okay, so it finished booting up. Let's put my, and there we are. We're in Windows. And we're just going to check two things in Windows, and then I'm going to close the video. So let's open up my file manager now. Let's go into C drive. Let's right click it. Let's click on properties. So now we can see our whole disk, our whole Windows drive is back to 127 gigabytes. I'm using 24.5, and I got 102 gigabytes left. And let's close this. Let's go back into disk management, right click it. Whoops, and I hit the wrong button. Well. Anyways, let's go into here too. Let's just see our performance now. Let's go into memory. And we're using, well, it's not bad actually. 2.1 gigabytes for Windows 10. And it's not bad, even though it's a lot more than Debian or any other Linux distribution. Because my Windows 10 computer at work, on a fresh reboot, a fresh restart, it's using about 3.2 gigabytes of RAM. And by the end of the day, it's up to 4.2 or 4.5 gigabytes of RAM. So this Windows install, even though it's using significantly more than Linux, 2.1 is actually, 2.1 gigs is not bad for Windows. Anyways, I wasn't really going to show that, but I guess I should, because I do HTOP when I'm in Linux. And just one more thing we're going to look at, and I'm going to close the video. Let's go to disk management. And we don't really need to go back into this again, but we can see our drives are all back to normal. These our partitions, I shouldn't say drives, our partitions are back to normal. These 3 partitions are the original ones that were installed when I did this Windows 10 installation. And that's it. In this video, I showed you how to make a dual boot system with Debian, pure Debian that is, and Windows 10. I also showed you how to change the boot menu so that Windows will be the one you boot into by default at first. And I showed you how to prepare the boot menu when you're planning to delete your Debian partition. And finally, I showed you how to delete your Debian partition and log back into Windows and to put your Windows back to normal to the way it was. And of course, I think this is a lot easier than doing a dual boot with Arch in Windows 10, because we didn't have to go into the terminal and configure anything. Because when I did my Arch Linux and my Windows dual boot, before I went into the Arch installer, I had to do some things in the terminal. And when the installation was finished, before I rebooted, I had to do some things in the terminal. And here we didn't. So this is a lot easier. And to tell you the truth, I am really, really, really impressed with Debian 12. I think it's a great distribution. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like it and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Thank you for watching. Until next time, I am the Linux Mensch.